Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence. This week we're looking at a case that's very infamous in terms of the French side of the murder. It's the Dominici Affair. Unfortunately, I think it's kind of like been lost in the midst of time with regards to the victims who were English and on their holidays, which is why we thought it was particularly pertinent to look at the case this week. So let's go and have a look and examine closer Dominici Affair. During the war, it was very much seen as everybody putting in their full effort for the war, and in terms of politicians and soldiers, they were all very high profile. And not just that, we have very famous scientists from the time. Instantly we think of the people working on the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer later in life, regretting the work that he did. But if we look in on Jack Drummond, he was a biochemist living in England. Through his work, he helped increase the yield of crops for the farmers and for the population to basically have access to the maximum amount of yield. He worked very closely with the government and aided in helping, feed an island during a very difficult time. So he had a very different kind of like relationship with the war, but for his efforts he was knighted. So here we have Sir Jack Drummond and Lady Drummond and their daughter Elizabeth heading off to a French holiday in 1952, which was kind of unusual at the time. This is pre-package tours. So coming to France was very exotic and, quite a thrill and quite a big trip. So you can kind of tell that they were well-to-do and very middle class.
It's even pre-end restrictions in the UK. There were still food shortages and restrictions in food until 1954.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So people didn't have enough to eat. So yes, it would have been unusual to go on holiday abroad.
At that point, he was he probably could have written his meal ticket anywhere. He was working for doing more research for Boots the Chemist, which is for those outside the UK, if they don't know, is a large chain of chemists, say like CVS or Walgreens in the US.
Pharmacies for the rest of the world.
Yes, pharmacists, yes. I think quite a lot of countries have a chain of stores. I mean, I remember Boots kind of like almost trying to stretch around the world. I mean, they actually had shops in Thailand when I was there, which was very bizarre. But anyway, let's back to the story. We're down in PACA, and for those who've never been to France, Provence-Alpes, Côte d'Azur is the area kind of like round about the Mediterranean, round to the Italian border. Not only does it stretch on the coast, which is where all the holidaymakers rush to, but you also have very beautiful and very rugged scenery stretching up to kind of like south of Grenoble, I guess. Cedric and I have been on holiday a couple of times across that side of the country, and we have specifically been in the area where the murder happened, which is quite near Digne-les-Bains. It's very, very rugged. It's alpine. It's in the mountains. The roads aren't straight. Very, very rural. Very beautiful, but very, very rural. So I think it's not much of a surprise to see that the landscape and the locals were very isolated and very not in step with the rest of France, possibly.
That would have been the case for most countryside at the time anyway, in the 50s, because that was the start of the industrialization of agriculture. And
yeah,
remember Dominic telling us about the fields behind our house that were full of trenches to channel the water.
Oh, yes,
and they filled them for the tractors in the 50s, because before that they didn't have tractors.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of the country would have been like manual rural, not even industrial yet.
Yeah. The Drummond family going to an event in the local area of, I think it was actually in Ding. What was the equivalent of bullfighting but without killing the bull, which is still very popular, sadly still very popular around about that area. I think they had dilly-dallied. They'd stayed too long at this event and they were due to be going somewhere else. And they just essentially lost track of time and they were on the road and, they needed to find somewhere to stay. But it was okay because, they travelled down the country with their new Hillman estate filled full of camping gear. So they just chose a lay-by near a little village called Lur. Lurs, Lurs, so it's Lur, presumably.
Lurs?
Yes.
Lur.
Lur. The day of the 4th of August, 1952, into the evening. They stop in at a lay-by off of a main road, so probably something you would see. But I think when they say main road, I think it was an N road. So
that would be 50s N road,
yes.
So essentially a countryside road now.
Yes, it's not...
nothing special about it.
You're not camping by, a 3-lane motorway. You're camping by something that there would be traffic, but not, teeming traffic, not... and certainly not bumper-to-bumper traffic jams at the height of...
I don't even know if it could have been an N road.
I think
the only one that would have existed at the time is the N7 down there. N6 and N7.
Mm-hmm. So what we have is them camping overnight. It's by a river. Okay, you have the road on one side, but you have the river and a railway track. It's at 5 o'clock in the morning when one of the sons of the Dominici family, it's heading out to, obviously, I think he was heading out to feed goats at 5 o'clock. And this is when he said he discovered the body and there was someone on a motorbike passing, so he flags down the passengers.
So he reported the bodies?
He found the body and he caught the motorbike. The motorcyclist then went into the village to get some help and to get the police to come.
Yeah, so the origin of the discovery.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the son is Gustav. So Gustav Dominici finds the bodies.
Okay.
Sir Jack is on the roadside, a bit away from the Hillman, fully clothed. He's underneath the camping bed, so it looks like somebody's, tried to disguise the body a little bit so it's a little less obvious from the road. And then sitting by, kind of like slumped beside the car, was Lady Anne, who was fully dressed, and she had been shot. Sir Jack had been shot. And I mentioned the railway track. There was a bridge, and young Elizabeth was on the other side of the railway track, so she'd obviously gone across this bridge. I think she had the most savage death. Basically, her head was, she was pistol whipped. She was bludgeoned about the head with what they think was a rifle. I think the coroner described when they moved her head, it was kind of like lifting a bag of nuts. It had been quite badly beaten. So it was obviously very, very savaged and quite frenzied.
Did she go across the bridge or did she just cross the tracks?
No, we don't know, but they think that she ran across the bridge. But there's one slight flaw with that she was in her pajamas, she was in her night attire. There was no marks on her feet.
Oh yeah, so she went across the bridge, not across the tracks.
Yeah, but even if she had gone across the bridge, she still would have had marks on her feet.
Mm.
So the thought is, well, possibly somebody had carried her there to further away from the family.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So here we have a very rural area, not linked very, very well to the outside world, and it's in August. Living in France, I can tell you, not a lot gets done in July and August because so many people are on holiday and the police are no different. So it takes a while for the police to arrive. And because possibly of shortages in the police force, they call in the CID from Marseille.
Could also be that the local force is not really designed or trained for murders because there would have been few of them.
Could be.
So they could be trained for like road things and whatever,
yeah.
But when it comes to murder, they have to call the guys who are specialized, and they might be in Marseille. So is this the case now? If anything happens around Paris, you call Paris for murders, even though you might be 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers away.
They had to wait a whole day for the CID to turn up. So what you've got here is 3 bodies sitting in the heat without any of the crime scene being taped off, no cordons, nothing. You had locals, you had looky-loos, you had everybody tramping over this crime scene.
Yeah, clearly the local police force wasn't up to the task.
No,
they didn't know what they were doing. Yeah,
not at all, not at all. So the bodies were kind of like, the decomp was kind of like obviously being sped up. So that was probably going to compromise any evidence. You had locals touching, not only were they trampling over everything, they were also touching everything. They were touching the cars. They were touching any form of evidence. There was stuff lying around about the cars, like there was a hurricane lamp. I mentioned the camping bed. Pretty much everything was being touched. I mean, it was just outrageous.
Yeah, okay.
You had the Drummonds were visiting not family friends, but friends. And they must have been very close friends, because it sounds like the son was the godson of Sir Jack. And he turned up, and he could not believe just the chaos and how many people were around about these bodies. It was just, something not from the last century, but something from, a couple of 100 years ago. You wouldn't think about,
but
leaving a crime scene alone without letting it being touched. So here we have, as I say, them taking such a long time. And there's also not only the case of there being lots of people milling around, there was also not a clear chain of command with the evidence. There was evidence that had just gone missing entirely. There was bits of the gun. They established what type of gun it was, obviously after the autopsy, and it was a Rockola M1 carbine. Excuse me for not rolling off my tongue, because I'm not au fait with guns, but this was quite a common gun in the area. I think it was used by the Americans and also by the resistance in the area, and it was that was okay. That's the gun that was used, so it's clearly a local.
If it was used by the resistance, it could have been used all over the country, because it was dumped there by Americans and English, most likely. The resistance didn't make their own guns, so it would have been even more widespread than that.
The guy who was running the case, Sebier, Sebiille. Sebier. He was running the case, and they dubbed him the Maigret of Marseille.
Okay.
Of course, because this was a guy who was, the victims were, well-to-do. They were, they'd been knighted. They had been recognised for their efforts during the war, so they were a middle-class, comfortable family. You can bet your life that the government would have been involved. The consulate, no doubt, was well involved. So, it was a high-profile case. And this guy was obviously feeling the pressure. He was laser-focused on this gun. But he was laser-focused not only on the gun, but also on the farm next to it, which was ironically called the Grand Terre, because it was a very, very small holding. It wasn't big. I can't remember what acreage it was, but it was tiny. It was just very much a thin strip of land.
Grand Terre is probably because it was windy.
Probably, yeah. Because you've got the Mistral coming down there. It
would have been windy, yes. Yeah, it would have been. All the time.
Yeah. So what you have is this family, Dominicis, who were French-Italian, and they were very much rural people. They were seen as being closed-ranked and closed-mouthed, and the whole problem was exacerbated by the fact that the CID, when they were dealing with them, were having a great deal of difficulty, because they essentially didn't speak the same language. The Dominicis used so much patois, which once again isn't really hugely surprising to me. Going from the central belt of Scotland up to Aberdeen and then to rural Aberdeen is just like landing on another planet. It's not just the accent. There's just whole phrases and words that you just never come across, and presumably there it was the same.
It's slightly different because from the revolution on in France, there was a policy on not allowing local languages to exist. They were banned. So there are only very few places where people actually speak another language or speak enough of that other language not to be understood. Like, for example, my grandparents used to speak a few words here, and I do as well when I don't pay attention. But it's just a few words here and there. But there are very few places in France that have actually kept their language. It's like Brittany, Basque Country, a little bit in the Alps, in the southeast, and a little bit in the east, but mostly at the German border. But that's about it. Everything else is French with a few words here and there. It's been a policy because of the revolution and because of the way it fragmented the country. The policy was one country, one language. So all the local languages were banned. In fact, Breton has only been allowed to be taught at school in the late 80s. Before that, it was banned.
So presumably it's a bit like how the Spanish treat the Catalan.
Except the Catalan is an official language in Spain.
Okay.
So it's a bit different. Catalan is allowed to be used and spoken, but if you speak with the authorities or administration or whatever, you speak in Spanish.
Yeah.
Whereas here it was actually banned. We were not allowed to speak the local language. My grandfather used to be shouted at by my grandmother when he was using too many patois words, for example, because it wasn't allowed. But that's one of the areas, because it's so remote, where people have kept quite a lot of their language. They speak Occitan.
Yeah.
Which is now taught at school, because now it's allowed again.
Oh, yes, it's probably now fashionable.
To a certain part of the population, yes.
But
it nearly completely died, but now it's coming back.
Oh, it's a bit like Gaelic.
It's a bit like Gaelic, yes. Like Gaelic during the clearances and stuff, when it was actually banned, same thing, yes.
Yeah.
So it survived, but you only have about 10,000 speakers. You probably have even less than 10,000 fluent speakers of Occitan here now.
Yeah.
You have a few, and that's about it.
But anyway, you have this city cop.
Oh yeah, coming from Marseille or coming from, in fact, if it was probably the gendarmerie as well. So it means they are military, so they're not even from the area.
Yeah.
Most likely they came from some other part of the country, so they have absolutely no knowledge of the local language because they're not locals. The gendarmerie is nearly never locals because it's army. Mm-hmm. So you move around a lot. Yeah. So you stay 2-3 years in one place and you move to the other end of the country and then somewhere else. So yeah, they probably had absolutely no knowledge of the local language.
So here we have this guy trying to communicate with the family. And a family that would do, I mean, it was only 7 years after the war. So they probably weren't feeling that enamored with
authorities.
With the police and the authorities. So once again, the locals, well, not the local, but the CID slipped up. There was washing hanging outside, and it was the trousers of Gaston and Gustave. So Gaston, both their trousers were there.
For both of them?
Yeah. And
maybe it was the trousers cleaning day.
They sent their washing out. They to another member of the family. They never did their own washing. So this was hugely bizarre. And the trousers were, because I mean, they were. There must have been blood on the trousers, even if they just found the body. But they never touched them, never took them in for.
But they couldn't have done much at the time anyway.
No, I guess they could have got blood type.
Yeah, that's about it. And if they were a bit unlucky, it was common. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So the family went from, no, we didn't see them, we didn't communicate with them, we didn't have anything to do with them, to, well, yeah, we gave them water in the evening, and that was it. We didn't have any communication with them other than that. But because of the standoffishness, I think that probably was, a red flag to the gendarmes, and they kept going back to talk to them.
And the thing is, you know how they are in the countryside, how they are here, for example. They don't like people on the other side of the valley here. They consider them strangers and they hate each other. So when you have in a small village in the mountains, a gendarme that comes from Marseille who was probably born in Paris, yeah, of course it's going to be a stranger. They won't want to talk to him.
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned Gustave had found the body.
Yes.
Okay, well, Elizabeth was still alive when he'd let slip to one of his friends, and the friends then fed back the information that, he didn't do anything to help this poor girl. And he was charged for not...
not assisting a person in danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it exists here.
Mm-hmm. For not providing assistance to someone in peril.
Yeah. Here, for example, if you're a doctor and you see somebody who's having like a stroke or something, you have to assist. Otherwise, you couldn't be sent to jail, for example. if you can assist, you have to assist. That's by law compulsory. But given the state of her head, I'm not too sure what he could have done if they said it was completely smashed.
No, but what it did do, it did give them a chance to. He was imprisoned for 2 months for that. And then, of course, that would give them ample opportunity to lean on him for further information. And more information came out.
Okay.
They heard gunshot at 1 o'clock in the morning.
What time did they arrive?
He found them at 5 o'clock.
And they arrived.
I don't know what time they. No. I mean, it wasn't obviously.
Okay.
I mean, if they'd gone and asked for water and stuff, it must have still been daylight. They must have known. They must have been able to.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be up to like 10, 11 in the evening.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, obviously, when they were shot, it was Elizabeth who was the only one who was in her night clothes.
The others were not.
The others weren't.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because I was trying to think, did they have time to set up for the night and go to sleep? So if it was 1 o'clock, they heard gunshots, they might not have been ready to sleep yet.
No.
So they might have been awake.
It could be. But they had, the whole family heard gunshots. And they put it down to the fact that, well, there's poachers in the area, so we're not going to go outside and investigate because...
Well, that's probably true as well.
Yeah, it's none of our business, it's nothing to do with us. So they didn't go out and look. They didn't investigate. They didn't go and check on the poor Drummond.
But the same, if you heard gunshots here at 1 a.m, you would be curious, but you wouldn't go out.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be. We're very exposed up on the hill. I would not be at the window looking if there had been gunshots.
No, you can understand, given that they knew there were so many guns around after the war, you don't really want to go and investigate a gunshot. It's not your problem.
No.
We can wait until next morning.
Now, once again, the story kind of like changes a bit as well, that Gustav had said he'd actually gone to the campsite and investigated. So the story changes yet again.
But that was at 5 a.m.
No, he'd been moving the bodies apparently, and there was a blanket over, I think, Lady Anne.
And that's him.
Yeah, I think he said that he was actually going to investigate to see if he could find any shells, just in case they were from his father's gun.
Why would they be from his father's gun?
Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it?
It's weird that he would think it could be his father's gun.
Yeah, well, that's how Gaston then becomes kind of like the main focus.
Yeah, if the son expects his father's gun being used in the middle of the night, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Weird.
And also, Gustav lived in the family house with his wife, Annette, and their son, Alain. And they had quite a large family. And unfortunately, they'd had a falling out with one of the other sons, Clovis. And Clovis then indicated that Gustav had returned in after the gunshots and declared that he'd killed the English.
So Gustav said he was expecting his dad's gun to be used, but Clovis said it was Gustav that...
Both the sons were indicating that their father had returned to the house.
I thought one son was pointing at the dad and the other son was pointing at his brother.
They're both
pointing at the dad. Okay.
Both sons were pointing at the dad. Now here we have a 77-year-old man who walks with a cane and going out and overpowering three people and violently pummeling the head of a child.
But that part couldn't be easily explained, because at 77 you can still hit with a gun. That's not really surprising. What's surprising is that it could have killed 2 other people fairly quickly, presumably, given that they were in the same spot. Or very
no, they
close
weren't
to each
in
other.
the same spot.
No, they're not.
No.
Okay.
No, if you look at the picture, Jack is further away from whether he was going to collect firewood or something, or going out to relieve himself before they went down, camped down for the night or something. But he was on the other side of the road, a bit further up the road. It was only Lady Anne that was right beside the car.
Oh, that's strange. I would have thought the other way around, because if I was the old guy trying to kill them, I would kill the man first, and presumably it would be surprised, so it would be closer to the car in the campsite. And I would expect the woman to be away because she ran away.
Yeah, but
it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay.
The story that he then gives the police, that he had gone out with his gun and he had seen Lady Anne undressing and then had become aroused, and it was then that Sir Jack had returned to the car and found Gaston, trying to rape his wife.
Oh, I see.
And he had taken the gun, and then he had shot Sir Jack, and then he had shot her, and then he had taken the daughter away because he'd run out of bullets.
Well, that story doesn't really work, because if he was trying to rape the woman and Jack came,
Yeah.
Jack would have attacked him, and that's
Yeah.
when he would have been shot. He wouldn't have been shot on the other side of the road.
That's one of the huge inconsistencies. He said that Jack had grabbed the barrel of the gun,
but so that would have happened on the other side of the road, away from the car. That's
weird. That's why there's so many inconsistencies. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Jack didn't grab the gun. Jack didn't have any burns on his hands. When he's telling the story of how this all happened, he's reloading. When he's doing the actions, he's waving his hands about. He doesn't seem to realise that this gun is semi-automatic. And he seems to think it's one of these, shotguns that you have to load every time you use.
But that's his gun.
Well, the thing is, I don't think they ever find that type of gun in his house.
Okay.
So he doesn't seem to know how that particular gun works.
Yeah, so clearly it's not his.
So clearly it's not. He could barely get down on his knees because his knees were that bad. So I don't think he's going to be in any position to try and rape a woman who's significantly younger than him. Also, Lady Anne was fully dressed, so she wasn't getting ready for bed at all.
Yeah.
So none of the story is correct. So he's arrested. That's it. There, the CID are all happy. He then recants his story, saying, "No, it's not true. It's not true." And then Gaston recants his story, saying his dad didn't come in.
Okay, yeah.
So they basically, obviously, I don't know why he threw his father under the bus, but he turns the story back round to 180. Clovis, who had fallen out with the family, had fallen out with his father, never ever changed his story, but he wasn't there.
Yeah,
He wasn't in the house. So I mean, why he was giving any testimony at all, I don't know. But I think Gaston was protecting his family. I think he was just wanting it all to be over with, and just, yourself, you can so easily be pressed into a false.
Yeah, but the only reason why he would protect his family is if he thought that Gustave had done it.
Yeah.
So why would he think that Gustave has done it?
Yeah, well.
Because either it's something Gustave would do, in which case, okay, Gustave is kind of dodgy, or it's something Gustave said he had done, but if it's neither of these two, why would you think his son has done it? Surely your first thought is, oh, my son is innocent. It's not him. It's not me, so it's not us. So we'll look for somewhere else.
I don't know. I mean, he could have been he just retracted his story.
Okay.
I mean, I think the family were very bullied by the police. I mean, this was then, almost 2 years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
The trial itself was on the 19th of November, 1954.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a full 2 years afterward.
Yes. So presumably they would have been in jail for 2 years. What is Gaston would have if you...
No. Remember, we had the...
Well, Gustave was arrested and spent 2 or 3 months in jail.
Yes.
So
and
then they didn't arrest anybody for another year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Gaston's trial was kind of fast. It was 11 days. It was he had a very poor defence. It wasn't done. Didn't do him any justice. Obviously, it wasn't pointing out all of the bad crime scene. The fact that they'd found footprints near the body, and they'd taken they hadn't taken a cast, they'd taken a drawing. I think they'd done a drawing of one of the footprints. I mean, now that they get the plaster of Paris out and they fill them to make a mould of what the footprints they found around about the body was a crêpe sole, so something dressy rather than rural and agriculture. They're all wearing these sabots and stuff. So, I mean, they're not very similar shoes at all. So the shoes were very different, and there may be an explanation for that later. So Gaston spends 2 years in prison waiting for his trip to the guillotine, because obviously triple homicide is, a death sentence. But that's commuted down to life in prison, and obviously hard labour, which by this point he's, 78, 79, so he's not really up to much hard labour. And then 2 years later, because he's so old and infirm, they just decide to release him. And 5 years later, he dies aged 88 in a hospice in Ding. So what we have is no real proof of who murdered the poor Drummond family, and no justification. There was I don't think they found the weapon. I don't think the entire piece of the weapon. They found the lock and the stock of the gun. They found bits of splinters from the gun, but I don't think they found the entire gun as such. They couldn't connect it back to the family. There was just no evidence that this family had anything to do with the murder. They just happened to be very close at the time. So it's a sad story, but it's not over. At the time, as I say, the Marseille CID were very, very focused on the Dominici family, but there was witnesses saying that they saw the Drummonds talking or being physically threatened around about 1 o'clock by a kind of swarthy looking guy, quite well dressed. And two lorry drivers confirmed that they saw the Drummonds talking to somebody around about 1 o'clock, which would be around about the time when they were shot.
Okay.
If we fast forward to a prisoner in Germany, he then confesses to being there. He says that he was the driver of a multinational kind of like conglomerate of robbers who were on their way to Marseille to commit a robbery. They said, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned a hurricane lamp. They'd said they'd stopped and they'd seen the light from the hurricane lamp, and he had stayed in the car, and his compadres had got out of the car with various different weapons and had come back to the car, but significantly without this carbine, this Rockola carbine gun. That was then missing, and then they'd carried on their way. The German guy could describe the scene and the scenery and the roads quite well around about the area. So this just wasn't hot air. This just isn't something that he pulled out of, just to obviously provide some entertainment in his downtime while he was, cooling his heels in prison. It sounded kind of like almost legitimate. He gave an indication of they were in a lilac Buick. At the time must have stuck out like a sore thumb, because cars were not very brightly coloured and not big like the American cars were. Presumably that must have been because there was, air bases and stuff up in Germany that they had access to such an unusual car.
There was a short period after the war where American cars were sold in France.
Oh yes, the Buicks, that's right. No, what was it? One of the cases from Britain.
Oh, it was a lot earlier. It was before the war, but they were sold. The big American cars were sold after the war for a short period.
Okay.
So they could have come from that.
But this was lilac. Presumably, it just would have looked white in the dusk. Yeah. And there was a bus driver who indicated he saw someone beside this car in the lay-by very close to the murder scene, having a pee at 1 o'clock. So it certainly seems to put them in that area around about that time by 3 different witnesses. Later, the German authorities then further arrest the further 3 people, and they then admit to killing the Drummonds. And the French authorities don't do anything about this. Presumably, this must have been after Gaston had been in prison. Mm-hmm. It's obvious that these guys had just been opportunistic, thought they could rob, a wealthy family on their way past to another robbery. So they were obviously, criminals in the first place. So shooting someone and then running out of bullets. It also would explain why Lady Anne, who was beside the car, had the entry points of the bullets were from 2 different angles. Sounds like it was from 2 different guns. So rather than just one perpetrator, there was more than one. So to me, this makes far more sense, but just still doesn't feel like justice. It certainly doesn't feel like justice to the Dominici family, who've never been received a pardon. There has been a lot of investigation done on this case because nobody has actually, there's not been any official hard line on, this is how it's happened. It's not been reopened, re-examined and closed again. There's been a lot of investigation into it. And also conspiracy theories around the fact that Sir Jack may have in fact been a spy, which sounds a bit fanciful. He was visiting the area 2 or 3 times before because there was a local chemical plant in the area, and it could be that it was to do with the work with boots rather than because it was, I think specifically they were doing pesticide production there. So it was obviously kind of like, it must have been tied back into his work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the times he visited a well-known resistance head in the area. So that also got tongues wagging that maybe Sir Jack was, gunned down because these people came from Germany. Maybe it was from behind the Iron Curtain, and maybe it was all just the whole robbery thing was just a smoke screen just to kill him off. But there is absolutely no evidence of that, and it just is so fanciful. If you place a mystery in front of somebody, then invariably they'll start making up stories. So there we have a family who have the dark cloud of murder hanging over them when they essentially didn't do anything. And you have murderers in another country who seem to admit to doing the deed, but not being called back to France and made to do the time there. It's all very sad, it's all very tragic. And I think for me, the most tragic thing is, this is the Dominici Affair. What happened to the Drummonds? They were the victims. In this story, nobody wins. And it's just so sad. And I definitely think the moral is always be careful where you're camping. Camp somewhere where you know it's going to be safe. And this isn't a jokey, moral of the story this time. And keep careful, people, when you're on your holidays.